I'm going to let you. Thank you. Right, everyone. Well, it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to this brown bag. I'm Jamie Goodrich, the director of the Humanities Center, and I'm really excited to introduce my colleague and to welcome back a colleague who's left. So let me start with the introductions and then we'll move into the presentation. Dr. Adrienne Jankens is an assistant professor in the English department where she teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in rhetoric and writing studies. She has been honored with the President's Award for Excellence in Teaching in 2021 and the General Education Teaching Award also in 2021 for her work in English 1020 and 3010. Dr. Jankens studies first-year writing, reflective writing, and teacher development. Her work has been published in Composition Forum, Pedagogy, and the Language Arts Journal of Michigan. Presently, she is working on a book-length manuscript supported by a University Research Award. And with Dr. Clay Walker, she was awarded the Arts and Humanities Research Support Grant in 2021 to support the collaborative research work they will be describing today. And we welcome back Dr. Clay Walker, who's a lecturer 3 in the Technical Communication program in the College of Engineering at the University of Michigan, where he teaches writing and engineering and technical communication courses. Dr. Walker is interested in how language is related to personal, institutional, and social change, both inside and outside the classroom. His work has appeared in literacy and composition studies. Before accepting his current position at University of Michigan, he was a senior lecturer at Wayne State in the English department, where he was awarded the Arts and Humanities Research Support Grant in 2021. Currently, Dr. Walker is in the very early stages of building a similar collaborative humanities research team at U of M's Technical Communication program to help support lecturer labor and ongoing development of teacher expertise. So I'm very excited to hear what they're going to have to say today, and their presentation is entitled Collaborative Research in the Humanities, so I will let them take it away.
Thank you, Jamie. All right, we're going to start by just putting up a timeline here, and Clay, drop that in the chat for you. And you can take a look at the document in the chat as you're interested, but some of these events in this timeline this timeline of our working group's work, the Anti-Racist Language and Literacy Practices Working Group, we'll refer to a lot of these events and moments and more that are not on this, but that we find winding through our collaborative moments. So Clay, do you want to say anything about the timeline?
Yeah, I'll just maybe sort of just to give a brief description of at least the beginnings of this. It started during COVID, and 3 of us, Aid, me, and our colleague Nicole Vardy, all were in the English department, and wanted to work together. And it started with the Humanities Center working group grant, and we got that grant, which is I think $800, and we used that to get some materials. And we imagined having a reading group. We built out, invited some other people who we thought might be interested. We ended up with at least one of our colleagues is here, Linda's here, but Linda Jimenez, Meryl Krapansky, Anna Lidner, Anita Mixon, and Nicole Trujillo Pagan ended up joining us at some point in the fall. And then I don't really entirely remember exactly how, but we ended up then moving from a reading group towards a research group and seeking out funding through the OVPR Arts and Humanities grant, and ended up getting funding, put together an IRB, did some research, coded. We did this entire thing through Zoom and got our first draft out by fall of 2021. So in a year, started with reading on stuff that at least Aid, Nicole, and I were already kind of working on in different ways and interested in. And then we built that into this institutional study, which we'll kind of talk around a bit today. We did a Humanities Center talk on that work last year, I think. And but anyway, so in about a year, we got our first manuscript out, and then the ALP group, Anti-Racist Language and Literacy Practices group, evolved and brought in new people. It continues to work now, but things have changed, and so I guess it's a sort of interesting to look back at the timeline, because I think what we'll sort of talk about today is certainly not what we imagined at the beginning, but I think I'll just sort of leave it there. We'll sort of we'll talk our talk.
Thank you. All right, I'll click to the slideshow. All right, so like Clay just talked through, in fall of 2020, along with faculty and graduate student colleagues in communication, learning design, and technology and English, we formed a working group focused on reading in anti-racist language and literacy practices. I just pulled up while I was eating lunch, early drafts of our proposal, and we really wanted to look at classroom practices. That was our starting point. The team's work quickly expanded into drafting a collaborative grant proposal and pilot study. And as emergent team leaders in that first season, Clay and I met regularly on Zoom to talk through planning and what we were learning about the logistics of collaborative research in the humanities. We recorded these meetings, persuaded that through the experience, we would learn something valuable about our own processes. We also thought we might learn something about what we could say regarding what he and I both understood about the integral value of collaborative scholarship, but needed to be able to express. But why did we need to be able to express it? And to whom? Certainly, Clay and I didn't need to convince ourselves that it was okay to be doing collaborative research as we pursued advancement in our individual pathways in higher education. As we'll describe, it was not just that we enjoyed working together, and we still do after several years. It was not just that we were collaborating on this specific project because it was born out of a working group. We engaged in this project together because we understood collaboration as inherently part of the process of meaning making in our field, composition studies. However, we'd also independently received the message that solo authored scholarship was the way we would have to get ahead, that collaborative authorship would not be valued in the same way by tenure and promotion review committees. So we had someones to convince, not immediately, but soon, in some high stakes moment that could decide our individual futures, or at least that's the way the whispers of the anti-collaboration spirits reached my ears. Thankfully, our field has demonstrated already in its scholarship the necessity and value of collaboration to the scholarly writing process. It's integral to scholarly writing. What Andrea Lunsford and Lisa Eade called the myth of the solitary author in their 1990 book, Singular Text, Plural Authors, Perspectives on Collaborative Writing, is refuted by composition sociocultural reality. Even when we're alone in a room writing, we are not writing alone. However, that myth is deeply entrenched and even present in our teaching of first-year writing, though through the what Lunsford and Eade note as, quote, the absence of discussions of collaborative writing in freshman composition texts. And because I teach and conduct research in first-year writing, that point nudges my brain. I wish I could say that since 1990, when Eade and Lunsford made their observation about the absence of collaboration in first-year writing texts, that a lot had changed. But in that contextual, textual, social, material space, it hasn't. That's not to say that collaboration doesn't happen in college writing classes, and Clay will explore the value of that in a few minutes. It is to say that maybe it hasn't reached the legitimacy of being a writing practice that is foregrounded in the texts that tell first-year writers how to do scholarly writing, though I'm ever working on amending students' classroom experiences of that work. Doug Downs emphasized this in a 2020 chapter, describing the distinctions between the norms set for student writing and the norms of faculty writing, saying that, quote, collaboration is lifeblood for faculty writing and suspect and alien for students. Using a composite professor character, Professor Gina Plum, Downs illustrates the ways that Russell's polycontextuality is evident in faculty writing, and like the writing we'll talk about today. He writes, diachronically, this writing of Plum's will not be independent of her other recent writing. Her article will not stand detached from the grant proposal, which yielded funding for her team's work, the massive set of project management documents that accompanied the grant and the research, the field and lab notes that assisted in data analysis, and the rounds of emails between researchers that guided the project to the state in which it currently stands and which will guide its drafting. The article to be written is related to various conference papers and posters that have presented other findings along the way and likely directly builds on previous publications. Just as it will never occur to Plum that she stands isolated as a writer, the piece to be written is inherently in collaboration with the maze of texts that precede and will stem from it. Okay, so collaborative writing is legit. It's inherent in our scholarly writing. Why do even Clay and I even want to talk about it if our field has already established that scholars in composition studies, as well as in other fields, make knowledge collaboratively? Because we ended up with an experience we didn't know we were going to have. We structured a collaborative research and writing experience because we were already in conversation with colleagues in our working group, because we sought grant funding as a group, and because we understood that an interdisciplinary perspective was crucial for our research. But the actual outcomes of our collaboration exceeded our expectations. I feel it when Ede and Lunsford write. It has been this capacity of collaborative writing to open out, to open up, to explore both the experiential present and the theoretically possible that has so intrigued us. In an early brainstorming talk about today's presentation, Clay and I listed all of the unexpected things that came out of our working group conversations. We marveled at the wonder of working with our whole team as an online-only group. We had come together in the relatively early months of the pandemic, and some of us have still not met each other in person. I've seen Linda so many times in the Zoom screen, but I have never gotten to meet her before in person. But we see each other online every other week. Through this collaborative experience, as well as through the research we've been doing in the interim, we see the necessity of relationship building in these pandemic and post-pandemic Zoom times, and the ways that relationship building needs to be more intentional and different. We reflected when we were brainstorming on the ways that we as a group were learning how to develop care for each other, supporting each other through the ups and downs of the pandemic, the highs and lows of qualifying exam and prospectus preparation, the death of parents, the challenges of living in divorced families, things which sometimes moved beyond challenges into crises. I had been conducting interviews for another study when we started talking about this brown bag talk. And I was curious about the transcript keywords that were generated by the system I was using to work through those transcriptions. These keywords seemed useful for calling attention to major themes that might not be easily identified in single segments of dialogue in the winding language, super winding language of a planning meeting. Curious about the keywords that were present in just the conversations Clay and I had been having about our team's work, I gathered all of those transcripts in a group and I began counting the keywords. So here you can see the keywords are at the top of the screen. I wanted to see what they looked like all together. I understood this simply as a kind of invention exercise that could ground what I ultimately wanted to say about the output of our collaborative project in that first year or so. And I can say that our talk in those sessions matched up with what our purpose was when I look at these keywords. People, writing, and students were three of the keywords appearing most frequently. And I would like to take a few minutes to reflect on those three themes now before I hand the floor over to Clay. When I think about how to describe the people of our collaborative project, I think about it in three ways. People in the working group, the people who participated in the study, and the people we anticipate working with in the future or our anticipated Wayne State audience. In bringing together the members of our working group, it was especially important to us to engage with faculty and graduate students from other departments. The identification of working group partners from communication and education was vital to our project because one major initial impetus of our reading and research was the need to understand language and writing instruction outside of the composition program. And another was to begin to identify partners in building faculty development opportunities. Further, because we had seen several pop-up initiatives start and fade at the university, we wanted to resist insularity in our thinking and approaches and work for interdisciplinarity and sustainability. Clay, Nicole Guino-Vardy, Linda Jimenez, Anita Mixon, Anna Lindner, and Mariel Kopinski and I entered together in a collaborative and reflexive process of reflection on teaching and research, and each reading and conversation and writing moment then shaping the next. We also sought insight from colleagues that we knew important things about collaboration, about collaborative authorship, about platforms for making collaboration work. We spoke with Veronica Belat and Catherine Akers from the library, Dr. Gwen Gorzelski, Dr. Cheryl Ball, and Dr. Lisa Maruka, who each offered insight into collaborative authorship, research strategies, and trends in the humanities. These conversations helped us strategize our processes and provided fortitude for our mission. Collaboration is core to the humanities and foundational for a project that's resting on building relationships with colleagues across campus to work with them on thinking through the ways that we change our understanding of languaging. We knew that we might find in our quest to understand the experiences of a diverse set of Wayne State faculty and students, we would only get to interface with a sliver of the population. Ultimately, in our studies, the students in the studies represent an especially diverse group, whereas faculty represented in the studies are less diverse, especially interview participants. Nonetheless, they represent the uneven makeup of faculty at our urban research university. The Institutional Research and Data Analytics Diversity Dashboard shows that in fall of 2022, 65.8% of university faculty at Wayne State were white. Something else we could not predict, but which has held pretty steady in the 24 months since we recruited our first study participants, is that pandemic era study participation looks a lot like pandemic era class participation did on some weeks. It's kind of low. However, having a smaller number of participants granted us time and space to listen especially closely to those participants. It's also allowed our group to consider how, when the bandwidth for more work, even reflective professional development, is low, how we can offer collaborative experiences that are deep and professionally rewarding. While Clay and I understood the idea that a scholar needs to be able to develop and carry out research on their own, which we've both done and continue to do, we also could not buy into the idea that co-authored work was somehow less valuable or less rigorous than solo authored work. And in fact, as I detail the writing we've been doing, and writing as the second major summary keyword, and as Clay demonstrates the coding process that he developed with us, we hope to show ways that co-authoring has allowed us to complement each other's work to contribute value and rigor broadly defined. In late July 2021, I began a draft document outlining the findings of our small interview study with writing intensive faculty, and I shared that with the group. We worked through a drafting across the next several months, and in a final push before the holidays in 2021, submitted a manuscript for review. We received reviewer feedback in July 22 and worked on revisions throughout the fall, including another major push around the holidays in 2022. I was not working on any actual holidays, I promise. But we submitted a revision in early of 23. Throughout this process, we worked primarily asynchronously in a Google document, initially pulling chunks of writing from our grant proposal, IRB documents, and annotated bibliographies. As the group talked through coding and analysis of faculty interviews in our biweekly Zoom meetings, we worked to capture that process and its intricacies and challenges in the developing draft. Each of us, 7 co-authors of that manuscript, took on writing parts of the draft that spoke to our primary tasks in the research process as a starting point, describing coding, writing about particular interviews, crafting the literature review, for example. But we also worked up and down the document, revising sentences and building transitions and helping the argument become clear. Through marginal comments, we raised questions and agreed upon next steps. In Zoom calls, we talked through the harder decisions and actively worked on analysis. Our collaborative writing was an exercise in interpretation and knowledge making more than it was reporting the results. We negotiated our more political energies with the evidence provided by these interviews as we worked to write them together in the document. What are our goals as a group? What are the aims of our research? What does our research demonstrate now, and what do we still need to know? Do we agree on how we should express that and on how we will announce where our group's energy goes next? The exercise in interpretation and knowledge making became also an exercise in announcing our stance as a research team, working to learn our institutional context as we develop approaches to faculty development and anti-racist writing instruction. The revised manuscript, presently under review, addresses the dualized language ideologies writing intensive instructors often hold, valuing students' diverse voices for what they contribute to classroom discussions, but for stated experiential and professional reasons, holding tightly to standard academic English in their expectations for student writing. In addition to this article draft, which is the primary artifact that anyone outside of our group will identify as our work, there are, of course, 100 or more other documents we've written since October 2020, when we proposed the working group to the Humanities Center. Some of those were solo authored by either Clay or me or another group member of the group, some co-authored by the 2 of us, and some collaboratively composed by the entire group. These documents include grant proposals, reading lists, IRB documents, conference proposals, slide decks, research memos, letters to editors, revision memos, emails, meeting agendas, annotated bibliographies, additional service assignment forms, budgets, drafts, and drafts, and drafts, and drafts. The last keyword I want to talk for a moment about is students. The research and writing collaborations the ALLP group has worked through in the last 2 years has been energizing and productive. It's allowed us to work to develop a, quote, research coalition evolving, as our colleague Nicole Guino-Vardy has described it, a group in which our reflective practice is iteratively shaping the next steps we take in conducting research and developing professional learning opportunities for and with our colleagues. As we take stock in this season of our next steps, it's ever clearer to me that we cannot attempt to work on changing the languaging culture of our university without engaging and centering students in this work. We're writing teachers, and we're used to the presence of student voice as a ubiquitous, if complex and complicated concept in our classroom talk. Hearkening the arguments of scholars and the actions of several journals in our field, however, we as a group understand that as we research and write arguments about changing institutional languaging, we also need to continue to shift students and student writing from being the object of our attention to an active part of the way we make knowledge. Concretely, for the ALLP team, this means not just writing about students and what they say and write about their language and literacy practices, but writing with students about these topics. One strand of the working group research that's funded by the Arts and Humanities grant that we were awarded specifically takes up this call. In a study titled The Impact of Instructor Messaging on Students' Language Practices and Working to Engage Student Voices and Student Writing in Deeply Collaborative Ways. First, by asking students to select the artifacts that we'll examine together, and by reviewing and discussing narratives of the interviews with participating students. This study positions students as decision makers in the research process. Second, By collaborating with graduate and undergraduate students in analyzing study artifacts, these student interviews are read in dialogue with the languaging experiences and scholarly investments of these graduate and undergraduate students. Our developing analysis emerges as a text that speaks to the intersections of these experiences. The study is only halfway complete as participating students take courses in between their intermediate composition and writing intensive courses. So it's a longitudinal study and we've done the first round of interviews. Later this month at the Teaching of Writing Conference, and I'm putting a little plug in here, hosted by the Composition Program at the Student Center, I'll present the initial findings of this study along with Carly Braxton, a doctoral student in rhetoric and writing studies, and Raven Lockridge and Stefan Bezanovsky, two recent graduates of the bachelor's program, and we'll work from there to craft a manuscript for publication. The web of collaboration that has emerged from our initial group is becoming thick and ever more purposeful as the initial questions we raised trace new meanings and facts through our research. And I'm going to hand it over to Clay.
All right, let me just find my little file. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about, I'm going to start by talking about some ideas about thinking about collaboration, collaborative writing, and agency, and then try to take those and apply them to some of the work that we did in collaborating through Zoom in order to do the first phase of the research. And then finally, what I'd like to talk about is why collaborative research is important for non-tenure track faculty. Okay, so I'm going to try my best to go back and forth between sharing and not sharing. And I want to sort of do more of, stop share there, of my face in the screen. Okay. So first, to sort of start out, when I'm talking about collaboration today, I don't want us to think about collaboration as, I'm having trouble with my Zoom. I've lost my file to share. Are you, let's see.
Do you want me to share your slides?
It's like the slide disappeared from the share options in Zoom. And I don't know why. It's not even, maybe I'll just share my screen and see how that goes. If I share my desktop, my screen, do the slides pop up here?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. And it's kind of a weird, I'm not sure what happened with Zoom. Okay, so here's some ways to think about collaboration as sort of how teams are structured. What I'm not sort of want to talk about exactly about this sort of way of thinking about collaboration, which, we used a variety of approaches in our work, which spanned, if we just take the first phase through the first manuscript, which took a full year. I mean, we sort of used a variety of models, whether it's synchronous, we're all working on a project together, or we're doing more siloed approaches, whether it's individually or siloed as small teams from the entire cohort, or if we were sort of layering, taking phases of a project and working through them together. That's one way to think about collaboration. But where I want to sort of go to is picks up from Aid was talking about, reaching out and saying we need to see more collaborative research in the humanities. And I'm going to pick up a bit from William Duffy's work and try and connect it to how I've thought about agency in the past. So first, so instead of thinking about how teams are constructed, I want to sort of talk a bit about what co-writer agency, what collaborative agency is, and what does it look like for us in a team in this, team humanities-based research project. First, agency isn't, it's not mastery or control here. It's not agency as the avant-garde, like the ability to create something new that hasn't existed or something like that. And it's agency, I don't also mean agency like as a negative marker, like, which is often what might be used. Students have a lack of agency, a lack of ability, a lack of capacity. Instead, Duffy encourages us to think about agency as two things in collaborative settings as something that we share together, questions like who wrote that thing, but it's also a practice. That agency is a thing that we do in real time with each other, and it's something that emerges. It's a capacity for action that emerges as we interact with each other, as we interact with the various materials. I think if we think back to one of the slides that Ed showed, all of the documents that we created over the course of our project, it's really astounding when you look back at how much work we generated, but all of that sort of gets collapsed down to a few things, to a manuscript, a couple of lines in a CV, because we did presentations, this brown bag, another brown bag, but there are mountains of work that we created that Duffy calls the sort of minor labor of collaboration. And it's that sort of hidden work that makes possible the larger work that you do that it gets celebrated. Another way that I sort of want to think about, to sort of extend this idea of agency as something that we do, I think of agency as a capacity for navigating options. And I've written before, agency is a fluctuating sense of one's capacity to affect others and be affected that emerges from one's current goals, emotions, perceptions, ongoing recollections of memories and dispositions within feedback and feed-forward loops between ourselves and the world in which we act. This ecological view of agency emphasizes potentiality or unpredictability over intentionality. Agency understood from this perspective is the practice of navigating a range of possible literacy actions that emerge in a situation out of our dynamic interrelation to the conscious and non-conscious forces within the brain body, as well as the material non-human actors that press upon our situatedness. So, like as Aid was sort of walking through the sort of people, students, and just describing all the things that sort of happened, and you can't entirely separate the collaborative work that we did, the network building, the friendship building, the serious life events that happened. One of my kids went through very serious mental health episodes, and plus the pressures of COVID and teaching and living with the people that we live with, and plus the problems of software and just the problems of doing the research. All of this informs the collaboration and shapes the possibilities for action that emerge for us. And we make choices collaboratively as we move forward in the project. And Duffy really highlights this interaction sort of idea when he thinks about collaboration. What he says here, and I think I'll share this little bit of quote. Let's see if I can successfully manage again, I have no idea what happened to, nope. Okay, well, we'll just do the same way. So go back to here. You can see the collaborator screen, I hope. The quote here from William Duffy: "What collaborators produce is an enhanced capacity to interact with the various objects, including objects of discourse that exist in the environments in which they compose, environments that constrain how their writing might unfold at any given moment. In other words, the discourse collaborators produce, and by extension, the written product of this discourse, is influenced by the ecologies in which collaborators are located." So these ecologies influence the craft knowledge of the collaboration just as much as the collaborators do, although of course not in the same way or to the same degree. So here, the human and non-human actors, ourselves and our embodied and enworlded situations of our lives, all of these things sort of interact and affect the work that we do. Duffy encourages us to really focus on the moments that sort of this playoff between resistances and discontinuities. Discontinuities. It's a challenging word for me right now. Discontinuities. And these moments of discontinuity that happen as people collaborate are the moments where sort of agency emerges, where we have to develop solutions. Resistances in our work give way to discontinuities in the collaboration. Those moments require co-writers and collaborators to respond to find or develop new discourses that will resolve those breaks that impede their work. And so he encourages us to be attuned to those moments. And sort of, Duffy writes, we sort of confront and acknowledge the resistances posed by the objects of our collaboration, and we negotiate those discontinuities that the resistances engender. And I'll give an example in a moment of some of those that we encountered. Even though we each carry a unique combination of knowledges, habits, and expectations into the collaborations we enter, what we actually share with others in collaboration is the experience of mutual attunement with the various objects we bring to one another's attention as the collaboration unfolds. And those objects could be ideas, discourse that we create together, but also the software that we use to do our work, the research activities we do in a project. I want to sort of get one other idea on the table here before I start looking at sort of some of the things that we did, and to sort of try and open up a connection to non-tenure track faculty. So I want to talk about collaboration and collaborative agency as this sort of attunement and dealing with resistances and discontinuities in the research work that we do, navigating those challenges and creating solutions. But also sort of get out the idea that another focus that I want to bring into this is what collaboration means for non-tenure track faculty. And Adrienne's talk, I think, got in some ways to what collaboration kind of means for tenure track faculty. And the sort of idea of collaborative research being valued by the institution is an important issue for tenure track faculty, but for non-tenure track faculty, two collaborative writers, non-tenure track faculty, Joseph and Ash McNally, write, for many non-tenured faculty in particular, the opportunity to work collaboratively with other compositionists has become an antidote to the high service work component of academia. Faculty collaboration can make the work not only manageable, but also intellectually and personally rewarding. Collaboration allows for sharing of not just the academic labor of teaching and publication, but also the emotional labor of time management, meeting student needs, and balancing the increasing demands of teaching track work. While the investment required to cultivate a strong collaboration can itself be a form of emotional labor, the reciprocity it involves helps nurture not only that relationship, but also the professional and personal rewards it can produce. And so I think, what I'll talk sort of at the end of my bit is what this might mean for developing teaching expertise, but working in collaborative groups can help non-tenure track faculty continue to develop their understanding in managing all these we have a different sort of set of pressures. It's not publish or perish, I suppose, but it's something more like teach a bunch of students and do a bunch of community works. So anyway, let's talk a bit about, I'm going to go back to screen sharing now and talk about, here's my Zoom. So let's look at what we did. And what I want to focus now on is, so one of the major problems that we encountered was, I gotta get rid of these Zoom toolbars, was coding our interviews. And we started with deduce. Do you still see the deduce screen here? I'm not sure if it works. Okay, good. So I'm going to sort of focus on the coding problem. One of the coding problems that emerged for us, how we dealt with it, and then I'll talk a bit about another moment that happened in the sort of summers, the winter summers, we were doing our research activities. And so, we started doing these, we surveyed students, we did interviews with faculty teaching intermediate composition, or the capstone writing courses rather, in the disciplines. And we did some focus group with students in the winter of 2021. And this body of research formed the basis of the first manuscript that A described, where faculty have these dual attitudes towards diverse language practices in their classrooms in the disciplines. We started with working with Deduce. Again, we were entirely working remotely. Deduce is a great software for coding things like transcripts. It allows you to, it has a lot of features, allows you to develop a code book, to identify sample codes, to look at, to rate sample codes, excerpts of different codes. And so, we started with working Deduce, but one of the challenges was we were trying to do work synchronously, but separated in different physical environments. And there was a limit with Deduce. We were overwriting each other's work as we're trying to work on the same manuscript at the same time. So we switched over, and now I'll try to show. So in response to that, we created a sort of, a Google Doc. It's a few different types of sheets that allowed us to do the work synchronously, but in different physical environments. So this is an example of the template. And in this template, there's at the bottom, if you look, we have different tabs where Coder 1, Coder 2, and Coder 3 could have a workspace. That our code book was built into here. And in this main page, there's a bunch of fancy formulas under the hood that here, if I click on this equation pulls data from this tab. So we could pull, as each individual person codes a manuscript, a transcript, it'll show up here. And I'll show you a live version in a second. So here we go. So here's one where I was coding, and as you if you go into these boxes, and I could read a line in the transcript, enter what the code number I thought it would be. Let's see if maybe that one's not. So here we have 11.6. I could call it 11.5, and it'll populate the names and the root and the child codes for that label. And then we created, we would put these together. We created another set of sheets that allowed us to compare different codes across. So we'd have here well, maybe we should back up, because on this one, this allowed us to sort of look at all the different codes that we had and sort of do code norming without overwriting each other's work. And then we had, wrong tab. So here we were able to pull, once we normed, we would have a code. This is organized by code right now, but we could look at each transcript and what are all the excerpts that align for each code, for example, or we could look across transcripts. Here's one transcript for Rebecca, here's one for Barbara. And so we ended up, shifting to this other solution to do our work. And when we think about this collaborative work we did together, we were working with each other. It was me, Aid, Anita, Anna, Linda, Mariel, Nicole were all working through the summer. We were involved in doing, we each contributed to doing the interviews in different ways. We created protocols for the interviews so that we had the same sets of questions. So we each brought different kinds of experiences. We came from different departments, different background trainings, different experiences with research, different experiences with the work that we were reading in anti-racist pedagogy, for example. But then also we were working with all these non-human actors, COVID, Zoom, Otter AI, Deduce, Google Sheets. We had a research design that we were working with. So we chose one where we were excerpting transcripts. So we had just the smallest unit that made a claim was how we broke up our transcripts. And then, we were trying to use a coding method for each of the transcripts, but separated by physical spaces. We were working with transcripts. We had the personal family issues that I already mentioned. So all of these things together sort of created this problem where Deduce, which normally probably I think we would have just worked if we could have just been in a room together and put Deduce up on a screen, but it was difficult for us to do that and sort of, across in our different rooms where we were doing this work. So we shifted over to Google Sheets and had to create this entire system for how to do collaborative coding. We had to create a system that didn't really exist. Sort of that sort of was an outgrowth of us working together and identifying the resistances and the challenges and creating a new solution. The other thing that I want to sort of talk about from our experience too, though, is sort of to touch a bit about, that's one example of a challenge. Another example of a challenge, though, had to do with our work so we had grant funding, which provided us, we were able to hire graduate students to pay them to help do work. We were able to get money for travel to conferences. We were able to get summer money to focus our research on doing the coding. We had money for resources, money for providing compensation, small gift cards for participants in our study, the normal kinds of elements of a research grant. But another thing that happened, though, in this study, in this collaboration, was we had this dynamic mix-up of non-tenure track, tenure track faculty, graduate students. And part of the grant money allowed for course release so that Aid and I could each focus on developing different parts of the project. And so the grant money paid for the course release. But another factor we were dealing with was administration. And I'm just going to maybe just share this text and which I wrote to a couple of colleagues at the time. And I think illustrates some of the, because I want to sort of get at here at the end, why this is valuable for non-tenure track faculty. And some of the frustrations of being a non-tenure track faculty can be difficult to understand if you don't live that experience. And this text gets at this. And I wrote this to two colleagues, and I'm going to read it out loud here. And I've redacted certain parts of it. And the people who are named gave permission to share this today. I'm just sick of having to fight for everything, though. You see, I didn't go on the job market when I finished my PhD because redacted reasons. Ended up getting a divorce, and we have kids, so I'm here, etc. At some point, I decided if I can't get the job I want, I will just make this one work for me. And that led to sort of organizing lectures in the union. Lots of other lecturers were so important in making this happen with the union, especially Christine Knapp and Richard Pino. But that's kind of how it started for me. But fast forward to now, June 2021, I've been doing my best to research and write, and I've won a couple of big grants at WSU, including recently OVPR Arts and Humanities for $55,000, but upper level administrator name redacted denied my request for a course release because I'm a lecturer. And I've been so mad at everything from redacted names. I had an interview today with U of M, and I want to see this thing here, the work in the union, be successful. But I think, I could just do my job there at U of M and have a peaceful fucking life. I don't have a job offer or anything. It was just a first round interview, but still, it's all exhausting and challenging. And I mean, we had a great experience in our team, but there are forces that you can't control that affect the work that you do. And I want to sort of maybe transition now to the, let's talk a bit about what this means for, okay. So another screen share. What this means for non-tenure track faculty. And so the first thing to sort of emphasize here, this is not the right one. Are you seeing the ratio of non-tenure track faculty slides? Okay, good. So here's data, APED's data on the ratio of tenure track, non-tenure track faculty in doctoral public institutions from 2002 to 2021, the most recent data. And what I added here a line of best fit with projecting if this trend continues, what will we look like in the next few years? I mean, clearly you can see the green line is tenure track, non-tenured faculty. The blue line, the blue data points are tenured faculty. The yellow is non-tenured track, full-time only, not part-time. This is all full-time faculty, non-tenured track faculty. We all have experienced this, we can see this, but this is an important thing to acknowledge sort of at the fore here. When we talk about the value of research for non-tenure track faculty, one thing to start with is there was this, acknowledging this fact of how the academy has changed. But second, looking at this study of stakeholders in the university, scholarship is an important part for non-tenure track faculty. It's a key factor for tenure, sure, but what separates non-tenure track faculty, I'm going to stop sharing and just sort of talk to you. What separates non-tenure track was, teachers at universities, from K-12 teachers, is there needs to be a commitment to developing our expertise. And scholarship doesn't have to mean the same thing necessarily as it does for tenured faculty, but it's something that needs to happen. We need to develop our knowledge and our positionality in conversations in the academy with our colleagues, which include tenured faculty. We can't just rely on the training we got, in graduate school and just sort of follow that through. But if we look too, there is a study of stakeholders up and down the ranks in from regents to provosts. And one thing that they found was that once, for example, one state higher education executive said teaching faculty have to have some way to stay current. Scholarship, as it is traditionally defined, is probably not the best way to ensure this happens, but something needs to take place. And what Kezar and Maxi have argued is they argue for this idea of scholar educators. And they say we purposely put the word scholarly in front of educators to suggest, as many of the chapter authors have, the importance of establishing a scholarly identity that values faculty members' connections and contributions to their disciplines, ensuring opportunities for them to engage in scholarship in any of its many forms. This is as much a priority for professors with more traditional tenure track faculty roles as it is for the majority of contingent faculty, including full-time faculty, whose roles primarily involve them in teaching. Seth Kahn has observed that the academic culture often devalues teaching. And the text example I showed is an example of that. Faculty, Seth Kahn writes, faculty who are told they can't do research because they don't need to, and they shouldn't do it because they aren't supposed to. This attitude does no service for the academy. Teaching is often used as a kind of punishment. And there's a lot of ways we can look at that. But one way here is, telling teaching faculty that they can't do research because they, quote, don't need to, ignores the fact or glosses over the fact that to be a quality teacher, in an institution like Wayne State or the University of Michigan requires you to develop your understanding of your subject matter, to be continuously involved in research. And I sort of call them capital R research and small r research. We can think of that as sort of like doing big projects like IRB projects might be capital R research, but being involved in reading in your field and having time to write and to develop your understanding is small r research. So anyway, so the already, just to sort of close out here, collaborative research offers opportunities to help lecturers engage in peer mentoring, support each other, to develop that kind of active professional development and research that can allow them to further develop their teaching expertise. And thinking about goals like scholarly educators maybe is a way that universities should go, but further developing support and placing value in collaborative research in the humanities will have a great impact on non-tenure track faculty, many of which, like myself, are in humanities programs doing service teaching. And so with that, I think that is my argument for why it's important. And I suppose we open it now.
Well, thank you, you two, for a very interesting presentation. I'd like to open the floor for questions and conversation. I guess I'll use my director's privilege and start the conversation. It was really interesting hearing you talk about collaboration because, as a literature faculty member, we don't collaborate. And I felt that I could not write anything collaborative until I had tenure. And I've written, a couple of collaborative pieces now with one of my colleagues outside of Wayne State, and they're great. They're better. The two of us agree that we can write together. We write better things than we write separately. And yet it's not. It's real. I mean, in literature anyway, it's really not the norm. And I think people see it as a sign of weakness. And I feel like maybe the attitude is different in composition. So I guess my question is, what would you say to these other humanities disciplines where that myth of solo authorship is really entrenched? I mean, it's one thing to be like, the author is dead and we're all a tissue of citations and we're all responding to one another and we're in a giant conversation. But then it's another thing to be like, but professor's solo authored monograph, like that is the thing. You know what I mean? Like, how can we alter that calculus?
Well, I'm going to take a baby step answer and just as a piece of evidence of how it's different in composition than it is. And then I'll maybe that Clay can jump in with a bigger, better answer, because that's how collaboration works. I recently proposed a chapter based on an interview study that I did by myself to an edited collection. And in the study, I interview 4 of my coworkers in the program. And the editors wrote me back and they accepted my proposal and they want the chapter, and they strongly encouraged me to ask one of the participants to co-write with me, because they're heavily invested in the field in having the voices of graduate students and non-tenure track faculty represented in scholarship. And I'm not gonna say no, right? Not just because they wanted it, because I could have said, oh, I'm going to write it myself, but because, like you just said, Jamie, there's something better and it's different than what I would have written myself. And so I think like I'm accumulating evidence of the necessity of it for my field. Now, in terms of how you convince others, I think it's sort of drawing. Maybe I would start with drawing from the examples. What are the things that happened in this manuscript that were not going to happen if I didn't write it with Linda or with Clay or with Nicole? I think, I don't know, you have to have the opportunity to talk about that though. That's not a greatest answer, but Clay, what thoughts do you have?
I guess I'm thinking at the end there, as you were talking, just about how back to Duffy's idea that, we encounter these challenges, we're affected by these human and non-human actors in our work. This happens, and I think Jamie's question acknowledges that there is no really solo authored work entirely. I mean, like Bactine said, every word we borrowed from someone else, and all research begins with something and anything that you write is inevitably shaped by conversations you have and things that you read, and it's a little bit, you're always dealing with the text as it unfolds, but I think, like, when you talk about working on teams on a project, it is enriching, and it does open up possibilities for invention that you wouldn't have happened on your own, but you can't, it's like a thing, I guess, like you can't entirely explain it until you have to just do it. And then in the doing, you see, one, it's a lot of work, but two, what the possibilities are. And I don't know, I'm thinking about sort of like, and it's a surprise, it's often a surprising experience. I'm just thinking of moments where when we were talking about very difficult things about anti-racist pedagogy and having very real and raw conversations about ourselves and things that we've done and things that we thought we were doing right, but wow, maybe we were not doing things right, and realizations and real moments, and sharing ideas and developing deep understandings of material together. Those are, I'm not saying that those can't happen when you're working on your own, but it's just a different kind of experience, a different quality of experience that when you're working with other people. And so it's like a thing it's very hard to name. It's an affective thing.
I was in an initial version of my presentation, I was going to quantify all of the documents that we wrote. And then a few weeks ago, I was trying to put together that list. And I told Clay last week, I was like, it's ridiculous. I can't even put together a list of everything we wrote and who wrote it. I mean, I could, but that would be like, I would need another grant and a course release just for that. So I think like quantifying might be one strategy, but the collaboration, the kind of collaboration we're talking about is not carving it up and everybody doing a little bit and it's easier. It's more investment and we're less sure, I think, where we're going to end. We have goals, but it's not as easily mappable. And so it's harder than writing by myself to write with others, but there's a shared, I know that I'm coming to know something that is more meaningful because I've been able to talk about it with my team.
Can I just add again, sorry, but thinking there at the end, like, research is always hard. Life always happens while you're doing research or any of your professional work. And just thinking there at the end about how, like, these very difficult things happen for some of us during the course of the project, and where normally if you're on your own, you can say, well, I'm just going to sort of set aside my work and I'll come back to it. And that coming back is always difficult. If you've experienced it, you sort of know it's hard to pick up the pieces even after a month. And but when you've got sort of each other, the project can keep going, and people sort of came in and out as they were able to dedicate more time or less time. They participated in different ways. And that's just sort of how collaboration can sort of help bring, sort of like raising all the boats, helping bring all the people along as we all navigate our lives and our institutional work and our other commitments that we all inevitably have. And that's a real important value of it, aside from the scholarly invention and intellectual development that happens.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
I have an observation I'd like to share. There's no real question here, but as you were describing the processes that you found your way to in order to work synchronously and remotely, it reminded me, so I am one of Clay's colleagues at U of M in the program in technical communication. I'm also a lecturer. And the majority of my students are electrical engineers and computer science students. And the computer science students, I would say in the last 5 years for sure, and maybe 7 or 8, there's been kind of a slow change in approach to team projects where students are writing code. And there is a method called pair coding. I think I have the term right. I haven't looked it up and I haven't thought about it in a while. But what you worked your way to, since you could not be in person together, but you wanted to work synchronously, reminded me a little bit of pair coding, where one student sits and is the person at the keyboard and is typing, and the other person is watching. And in the meantime, they're having this ongoing conversation about what is the next step in the code, what should we write? And I have not read it, but I believe that there's research out there that shows that the number of errors and the number of bugs in code that's written in a pair coding situation it's lower. I did not think about that as a moment of collaboration, but it's very similar to the kind of collaboration you two are doing.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun.
It reminds me of sort of another way to think about the things that you deal with in collaboration is the when we're working on a manuscript, the text as it unfolds is something you always wrestle with. But here it's also with, like, Aid and I were the primary drafters of the first manuscript, and then we'd sort of draft chunks, and then the rest of the team would read. But oftentimes it would be big chunks would be the two of us, and it's a sort of experience of sort of trying to listen to what the other person says, read it as an editor and as a contributor, and but then try to continue to contribute that argument or that idea, add something new that is important for you or that you see. It seems like a related kind of move is what you're describing.
There's a back and forth. There's an exchange happening along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add to that, Clay, that description is helpful. I can go right back to our moments on Zoom doing that, or on the phone talking through things. And it makes me think about not just the number of documents we created, but the number of modes we would be working in, like across any given week. Even sometimes within a day, we'd have a video call, a phone call, we'd have texts, we'd have drafts up, we'd have comments in the documents, and sort of negotiating all of that and learning when we had to listen to each other. And sometimes, like, Clay would be talking and I'd be taking notes just to try to capture it, because we had to also learn how we were making meaning through that process. So it just worked so differently. I mean, I do all those things on my own too, but then I had to take on new roles as well when we were working through this project. And that's been cool to see all of that active practice develop.
Any other questions? We could take one more, I think.
I'm just going to make a comment. Clay did not celebrate himself well enough in demonstrating the coding work that he did the summer that we had to move from Deuce to creating a new mode. I mean, like, I've almost put it shoved into my subconscious the difficulty of coding that summer, because it was really challenging. But Clay, when you said there's a lot of formulas under the hood of that, I mean, the work that happened so that he did so that we could continue and keep moving is more, I mean, hours wise, I can't even imagine what it was, but it's impressive. It was impressive. And it was something like that was not just, that's another thing with the collaborative element, is it wasn't just something Clay made for himself. He had to make it so that we could all use it. And and train each other on it and then use it. And it was just amazing. And we were able to like use that, into the future, which was really neat. So thanks again, because that got us through that summer. But it's a huge part of the writing of this team's work that is buried. Like if he doesn't talk about it, nobody knows.
Well, thank you. And and I guess I'll just sort of say two things. I definitely enjoyed figuring out how to make the formulas work to move text over where we needed it. But I ended up finding it so super helpful when we got to the drafting the manuscript and the way we were able to sort and sift through all of the transcripts that's, I never would have, I don't know that I would pay for Deduced again after having developed that. And, but anyway, I don't know if there's not to put you on the spot, Linda, but you worked with it. And I don't know if you have anything you might add that we haven't shared about that collaborative experience in Google Sheets.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Aid that you undersold yourself on what all we did was we pulled up the Excel spreadsheet and we put in a number and it generated all this information and you made it seamless for us. But I think that speaks to how you talked about, like it was an ebb and flow. Like sometimes some of us could give a lot of time, lot of personal challenges that were happening at the same time when we were like gone. And then I think this is, Jamie, to your point, is that the work always kept going. It never slowed down. And I think that's the momentum that we needed, not just for our own morale, but just so that we could be productive. And I think that speaks volumes to the ability of working within a group, in a powerful group, and in the right group, in a group that we really cared about each other. When we started off the meetings, how are you doing? Is everybody okay? Because we had like crazy things going on. And so it wasn't just about like getting to writing the manuscript, but supporting each other through a global pandemic and challenges with Zoom and finding out, when we were in Deduce, we were actually erasing other colleagues' work, and just knowing that was okay. And those mistakes happen and we had those trials, but we were ultimately able to overcome those very difficult situations that we would have never been able to imagine when we came together in fall 2020. And we haven't met, we still haven't met in person. But I think, you have to keep talking about the benefits in a way that convince people, because we've actually been able to produce a manuscript speaking to our collaboration and how, that we never even considered that to be a possibility. And all of a sudden it was an opportunity for us. Oh, let's talk about our journey, because we're different writing styles, different scholarly approaches, different fields entirely. But we were able to meld it together in a way that was generated success for all of us in the group.
Well, that seems like a good stopping point for us all. So I'll go ahead and let's give our participants and our presenters in particular a round of applause here. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and thanks to the presenters for a very interesting talk. Thanks, Adrienne and Clay.
Thank you so much.
Nice seeing you all.